Hello, YouTube. We're going to do something slightly different. I have a guest, a thankfully willing guest. This is my boyfriend slash fiance. We've been together for 8 years now. I'm going to talk about what it's been like for him being in a relationship with someone with a psychotic mental illness. Now, when we first started dating and over the course of our relationship, he's known that I have bipolar, but he's always said that I appear so normal that, he never really noticed, and I don't think he really understood. And in his own life, he never had to deal with someone with psychosis himself, so he was not equipped to know what to make when I had my psychotic break. So first, what was the first time that you noticed me, that you noticed something was really, really wrong? Because when someone is totally psychotic, they don't know they're sick. And so it wasn't like I could tell him there was something wrong.
It was kind of an interesting time in our relationship anyway, and I had, typically we obviously talk every day, we're partners, and our communication had been drastically reducing itself over like maybe a period of a week and a half or two. Occasional things on Facebook, but not very many texts, not very many calls, but life was a little bit more complicated back then in some ways. And I had talked to her on the phone the night before, and she had said, "I'd like to see you tonight, maybe you could pop over tonight." And it was late at that particular night. I said, "Why don't we just do it tomorrow? Tomorrow would be nice." And I wish I hadn't made that choice. I wish I would have came over that night. But I went to the door, and I had dropped off a care package box with a bunch of silly things in it, like several days before that. And I remember noticing that it was still on the front porch, sitting there, which was fine. But when I knocked on the door and she came, something was so off. I'm going to tell him about the hat.
The dress, the demeanor, the weight loss, the crazy eyes.
Yeah, all of those things. She'd lost a significant amount of weight. She was like, gaunt, very gaunt, and she had this like hat, like a winter stocking cap that her mother had given her. That was absolutely ginormous. It was that coupled with how thin she was,
peculiarly dressed, and I wouldn't let him in. I wouldn't let him in my house because in my mind I thought he was a duplicate. I'm sure he didn't understand why I had invited him over and that I wouldn't let him in. And I snuck his phone through. I asked him to pass me his phone, and I snuck his phone through. I don't remember why. But I wouldn't let him in the house because I thought he was a demon duplicate. So I invite him over. I'm dressed in peculiar fashion, gaunt, and looking around the corner every which way, and I won't let him come. I demanded that he'd leave. And he'd also heard from people that I work with that some of the places and items that he had left in the care package, I had been wandering down the street carrying a teddy bear and a happy face balloon, wandering down the street with this stuff. I did a lot of crazy things, but so at what point did you knew something was wrong, but you didn't know what it was because you'd never experienced psychosis before. At what point did you intervene and get me to a hospital?
Well, it was the if I'm not mistaken, it was the very next day. Her neighbors, her friends, her family, her coworkers were contacting me saying that there was something seriously wrong. And one of the neighbors even I think texted me and a couple other people as a group a picture of Brenda walking down the street with with weird people and weird clothes, and it was cold, and you just looked so different. And again, this was a period in time, and we've been together a long time, but okay. Anyway, so I was really worried that day, and the very next day, early, I get a phone call from her boss who, was asking, do you know how she is? Do you know where she is? And I don't quite remember how it went down, but...
you were at the Big B.
I was at the Big B talking to your boss.
I had,
that's right,
through a very long story I'm not going to get into, wound up on the campus of a university running with someone's cell phone, barely dressed, across campus, and I wound up, ironically, at the psychology department into a psychology professor and a psychologist, and they said that I was manic. They called the police and they asked for a phone number, and I gave them my boyfriend's phone number. And so just at the same time that my boss was having this conversation, asking him, because the Big B, if you don't know, if you're not from that region, is a coffee house. So he was sitting at the coffee house next to my job. My boss was asking him, where am I and what's wrong with me? And he gets an emergency call from the police that I am acting erratic and they're going to take me in from the campus in the adjacent town. And so he comes over and they pick me up, my boss and my boyfriend. And I was so paranoid and afraid, I didn't know who to trust. I kept hopping back and forth between cars, between the cop car and their car. Eventually I got into their car, and as I learned later, I kept trying to get out of the car. He had to physically restrain me. I kept trying to get out of the car, and I actually broke the handle off my boss's vehicle. And so I wound up in one hospital. They dropped me off. They got me to check in.
I just should say, for somebody that weighed about 90 pounds at the time, you had the strength of... it was really impressive.
It's the sheer adrenaline of psychosis will do that to a person. I was experiencing, that's how I could go days without eating and days without sleeping and days without, I was under mania and the adrenaline of psychosis. And I get to this one hospital, and as soon as they leave, I see the doors opening and closing, and I thought the town was going to blow up, so I had to get away from the town. So I take off running, and I end up getting hit by a car. And somehow from there I wound up in another hospital. So he comes back to check on me, and he finds me. He gets a call that I'm in yet another hospital, and eventually I get admitted. And he has to try and navigate. He's still trying to understand. He doesn't even really understand what's happening with me. And he's trying to navigate various hospitals. Some were good, some were not good situations where he had to take me out of them and watch me on my own. Some he couldn't get a hold of me. And I was in and out of many different hospitals over many months, and tell them how it was to try, especially as we were not married, and I don't have the family support, and you didn't even understand the dynamic of navigating that system, what it was like to try and be my advocate.
Well, there was a learning curve, and it was complicated. From that night that you escaped from the one facility, got hit by a car, I came back to your house long enough to get, a change of clothes and a few other things for you, and before I could even get back to that facility, I got a call from a police officer saying, "Hey, we've got Brenna, and we're taking her to another local hospital." So that was probably as straightforward it gets for that particular night. the next day, they had scheduled an ambulance trip to take her about 65 miles away to what I thought was a very nice facility. It had just a lovely campus, and it was about this time of year as well, maybe a little sooner, but
I just couldn't see it because they don't let the psych patients
yeah,
pass the psych
that's
ward.
the problem. So they had I had to find the place and kind of navigate the staff to figure out what section I was needing to be in. It was really a large place, and I will say that the nurses at that place were they communicated very well, and whatnot. Explained some of the difficulties that Brenda was having at the time, but what struck me was that there was a waiting area that was divided in half. On one half, through glass, you could see the male population, and on the other side of the glass, you could see the female population. And it wasn't, I think these were mostly people that were fairly out of control because there was a whole bunch of different segments in this campus, and she wasn't. She was just newly there and was not able to, follow the treatment plan and get to even another section of the campus at this point. And then I got very discouraged.
They mixed the men and the women together
They did.
at one point in
Yes.
that particular facility for a cleaning purpose, and so we were all thrown together, and he was very dissatisfied with that because there was a particular I had it just that made him very uncomfortable because some of the men were extreme, throwing themselves against the glass and other things, and I in particular was having religious delusions, and one of the men swore to God he was Jesus, and that was a bad combination. Eventually I had to go to a digital court hearing to get out of that place. I was briefly in, I don't want to name it to discourage it because I'm still receiving services there, but I was in an emergency crisis center for a general community type treatment, and that one wasn't good.
Nothing happened there. It was nothing. Nothing happened. It was stasis.
No, there was no treatment. I was just put in a room, and I just sat in a room. There wasn't even a bed in the room. I sat in a chair. I tried to sleep in a chair. I was given a blanket and a chair. It was kind of like being in jail. I was still confused. I didn't understand what was happening. They wouldn't really let me out of my little tiny room, and I wasn't receiving any treatment. And when he went in there to check, there was cops there. There was people peeing on the floor and pooping on the floor, and he got me out of there and took me home and cared for me at home, and
For a few days.
in between me winding up at another center, and still not really understanding. I mean, you can't understand psychosis unless you've been in it, and you still can't understand psychosis because the person cannot tell you what they're experiencing. They can't articulate to you clearly, and their reality is different than yours, and they tend to talk in circles. They will repeat themselves over and over. I wasn't sleeping. I was very scared, and it was a challenge. And what was it like to take care of me at home?
Difficult. I got to say this from the outset that I am much more prepared now. If anything like that should ever happen again, I am much more prepared. I was very unprepared. You were. I don't want to use the word out of control. It wasn't exactly like that. But
It was kind of out of control.
it was pretty close. and she would lay down for 5 minutes, then get up and sleep in the kitchen or run upstairs, and this would go on all night. I at the time was feeling very sleep deprived. I was constantly worried.
And constantly woken. I would climb up and either wake you up or lay with you,
Mm-hmm.
and then get right back up.
Yep.
And tell you weird things in the middle of the night while you're trying to sleep.
Yeah, definitely. The thing was, she would talk about a concern, whether it's the Lansing city's going to blow up, and then we talk about it. I thought we at least came to an understanding about, things, and about, that, things aren't imminent, everything was great. Well, not great, but I mean,
And then
get her calmed down, and then 5 minutes later, we were right back to
the exact same
the same thing.
conversation.
It's like it wouldn't sink in, and I must admit, at that time, my patience level was a little taxed. It would not be at this point, but I didn't know what to do. I honestly, I knew she needed help. I knew her family, who doesn't live anywhere around here, was very concerned. What do you do?
And as a general note to the family of, there's not a lot that you can do. You can't really reason with someone who is psychotic. You can do the best to prevent them from hurting themselves or hurting anyone else, running into traffic and doing dangerous things, but they belong in a hospital. It needs to be an adequate hospital that provides adequate treatment and adequate access for contact for the family, because the last place that I was in, so he carries some guilt for the way he acted, and he would be better prepared because he's seen it before, and you can't know until you've seen it. But I would be no better behaved than I was the last time. So he would still be sleep deprived, and I'm sure exhausted, and it would be challenging and disconcerting to ever have to deal with again. So don't feel guilty as a family member if you think you've done something wrong. It's okay. It's not easy. It is not an easy situation to deal with, and the systems are not easy to deal with. The last place I was in, no social worker ever came to talk to me. I was there for like 14 or 15 days.
Yeah, it was a while.
No doctors came to talk to me, except but one time. No one spoke to me. I tried to seek out people to talk to me, and no one would talk to me. Granted, I was out of my mind, but I needed treatment. They gave me medication every night, but no one tried to give me treatment or understand what was even happening with me. They only really understood that I may be psychotic the day they discharged me, because I let something slip, because I was keeping everything secret, because I was afraid to tell anyone, because I thought there was conspiracy going on, because psychotic people do that. And so I wasn't telling the doctors, but there was no doctor to check on me. And he had such a hard time getting a hold of anyone or anything about me the entire time I was there. It was like I was just, it's what, I don't know what they call it, I can't think of the right word for it, but when they just shelve somebody in a hospital and forget about them. And if it hadn't been for him, I may still be there.
It was a difficult situation. I thought that the staff, especially the psychiatry staff, the actual doctors that were supposed to behind the scenes keep everything flowing, they were just, I want to say, worthless. Absolutely worthless. I finally, after about 10 or 11 days, I finally mandated a meeting with the psychiatrist who was in charge of her case, and he didn't seem to grasp the magnitude of what was going on, or have.
Because he hadn't been talking to
No,
me.
he hadn't been. He hadn't been. I was pissed. You know, the only line that you could call in on, the patients themselves would answer the
There
phones.
was 3 phones in very distant areas in the hallways, and when you would call this hospital, the psych department, you couldn't call the actual people that were running the department. It would ring on a patient line, and it could ring on any one of these 3 phones. So if you didn't happen to be in the right place at the right time to grab that phone, it only rang 3 times, you would miss it. And there was a lot of people with a lot of mental health issues running around the hallways at all times, and they're like, ooh, the phone, click, and they would grab it. And if it wasn't for them, there's no guarantee they would say who it was for, and they'd just hang up. Or it would just ring, and nobody would get it because we were all out of our mind at the moment, and it wasn't, the staff would never answer these calls. So only a few of the calls that he got to me actually got to me. And eventually they did release me, and that was the last hospital I was at. I was still sick for a while coming up to till I got normal, and he promised to take care of me afterwards. I stayed with a friend for a couple of months and just slowly integrated myself into daily living, and plus medication, and eventually it was like Chicken Little, you know, the sky did not fall, and I became more and more normal. And that's when you're psychotic, you have a prodrome, you peak, and then you come down slowly. And I came back down to earth. If it were not for him, I would not have survived the system, because I could not speak for myself. And now he knows.
Well, it's truly important for anybody in your situation to have an advocate that can advocate for them. It's so critical. I don't know what would have happened if, you know, if I hadn't been able to do what I did.
I don't know what would have happened either, because I couldn't speak for myself. I was not in touch with reality. I couldn't speak for myself, and I wasn't being in most all of the facilities. I was not being treated properly, and because I was conspiratorial, I was tight-lipped, so I wasn't saying anything that would be a blaring indication that I was experiencing such an extreme psychotic symptom. They never understood what was truly going on until they released me, and I was still ill. I wouldn't have made it without him. But now, after being together for 8 years, thinking I was primarily normal with my bipolar, I mentioned that this happened once in high school, or at the end of college, which is why I don't do drugs of any kind. Because I've experienced being out of my mind. I like to feel in control of my mind as much as possible. And there is a chance that this could happen again. It was 8 years apart, but there's a chance this could happen again. And yet, in a way, it brought us together. The fact that, you know, he saved my life. He saved my life. But knowing what he went through for so many months, knowing what could happen again, how does it feel, and what do you think about being with a partner that could potentially have this happen to them again?
Well, first of all, the whole thing was like heart-wrenching. I mean, I can't tell you how sad I felt for you and what you were going through, and how, you know, fragile you were at the time. It was, it was, you know, it's heartbreaking to even think about it now. But, and that was 4 years ago now.
So I got another 4 years before I lose it again.
Well, you know, I think, I think, and I do love you so
I
much.
love you.
You know, I think in that time, she has received a lot of good therapy and a lot of good treatment that I think has uh, allowed her to understand more about her condition. Uh, you've certainly become more insightful about your condition, and um, sh- we have really good communication. Um, you know, I think that with there have been times that she said, "Hey, I feel like I'm slipping in one direction or the other," and so far we've basically been able to handle that and nudge things straight again. Um, and I don't foresee that same problem happening again. It's typically happened for her in periods of great stress.
Extreme stress is a trigger for psychosis. Psychosis can happen if you have bipolar or schizoaffective. It can happen on its own as just a symptom of the condition if you're experiencing an episode. But I am medicated for my bipolar, and I'm also on a antipsychotic, so I should not have it come up as a symptom of my illness. There's still, there's still always a minor chance that under extreme stress it comes up, but it could happen again. And yet he stayed with me.
Well, yeah. I mean, we've got quite a history. I love you more than anybody with equality of my daughter, who I love the same amount. But when this was going on, I wasn't certain whether our relationship was even going to survive it, but I didn't care about that. I wanted to make sure that she was safe and landed on her feet safely when this was all said and done. And that was the most critical thing. Um, uh, she communicates with me very well, and I'm glad we have that. And I'm not a controlling person. I don't pressure her into things ever.
He's wonderful.
And she's the same. We really get along well. And one of the things that I've really learned from the whole experience and have tried to maintain ever since is patience. I mean, I never.
He's very patient and calm and tries to reduce my stress as much as possible.
Yeah.
Which I really appreciate. If you were to be put in the same situation, I have a feeling that you would be on top of it much faster.
Absolutely.
And you would be much more equipped to handle navigating the system because now you have experience. You wouldn't be as shocked, and I think I would be treated much quicker, and it would be a much shorter
I think so.
issue.
And there's more tools available to us now than there were then. People that, professionals that we know and we can trust. There were some untrustworthy officials happening, which, there was some hinky stuff that I would never like her to ever, be proximate to again.
And in between, for those people who know someone who has a psychotic disorder, they've opened up to you, they've admitted that, or they are schizophrenic, which is cognitive and psychotic, or schizoaffective, or they have bipolar and have periods of psychosis. They have ever been psychotic. That doesn't mean that they're permanently that way. That doesn't mean this is something that is a daily existence. In between this one episode, the episode I had in college, and this one episode that I've had recently, I don't want people to walk away feeling like they're going to deal with this arduous, huge mental health system and have to advocate and have to deal with this on a daily basis. How normal am I, and how normal is it to be in a relationship with someone with these issues in a general sense when they're not sick? How safe, how normal, how ordinary are things with us?
No, you're perfect. You know, I think you're one of the most sweet, kind, insightful, intelligent people that I know. I mean, absolutely.
I feel the same about you. I love you very much.
I love you.
Thank you for doing this video with me.
Absolutely. I was slightly reluctant at first because it was kind of a last minute thing, but I'm really glad that I had done it on the fly instead of, you know, taking a day to mull over what I wanted to say. You know, it is navigatable. It is doable, and maybe we should put out another video that's maybe a little more technically informative on how best to navigate. We talked about navigating. We talked the fact that, you know, I was and you were able to navigate through this, but didn't really list you know, any of the steps in any definite
how
order.
you did it, how you were able to get me out of like the one situation where they just locked me in a tiny room and didn't treat me, and there were people pooping on the walls and stuff, and how you were able to, without being my family member or having any medical advocacy, get paperwork that has someone listed as your medical advocate. He had no paperwork, and somehow his charisma managed to talk them into releasing me
Both
into
times.
his care from 2 different facilities, which I'm grateful for. But I don't know how he pulled that off. So yeah, later, if you think, now that I've forcibly nudged you into my YouTube, if you do want to sit down and think about some advice, some of the hurdles you face, some of the things, and some more directed advice for the family to navigate the system, I think that would be really beneficial.
I would like to do that. I would absolutely like to do that and talk about some of the, you know, possible triggering factors that, you know, that don't help to mitigate, you know, people that are already having, you know, psychotic issues.
Alrighty, dear. This video is
I'm
almost
rambling.
40 minutes long.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, so I don't know how many people are actually going to watch the whole thing. So we need to shut it down, because I typically make 5 to 10 minute videos, and when I make it longer, people don't watch. But maybe they'll be intrigued
Same way.
by the 2 of us or by the topic, and maybe it will spark something for someone. So thank you for joining me.
You're
I
very
love you
welcome.
very much.
I love you. You're my love of my life, sweetie. That sounds dorky and corny, but it's true.
Yeah, we're kissing on camera and everything.
It's true.
All right, everybody. We're going to let you off the hook here, because this is a super long video. But I thought it was an important subject to get into, because I briefly covered psychosis in a couple different videos from my perspective. And from my perspective, I was completely unable and incapable of helping myself because I was fully psychotic. And the family of, and what do you do, and how do you navigate, and how does it feel to be with someone in the life of someone who deals with these problems, it's really important for the rest of the people that aren't specifically themselves psychotic. So I hope you got something out of this video and any future videos that he decides he wants to engage in. And this is my man. This is my man. You're gonna give me another kiss.
I was too.
I love you guys, and I love you.
And I love you. And
I love you more than I love you guys.
I'm really
Don't
glad
take
to
that
be
to
on.
heart. Bye, YouTube.